Okay, if you're a Led Zeppelin fan, I am certain you are going to enjoy this video and enjoy what I found. So, and especially if you're a Led Zeppelin fan going back to like Zeppelin I, the early days. So Led Zeppelin I came out in January of 1969. Now I wasn't alive when it came out, so all this stuff happened before I was around. But I'm still, so I discovered Led Zeppelin many years later. When I'm a teenager in the 80s is when I started figuring out who they are. But so what I've got here though, this is so cool. I love this. The Oakland Tribune, apparently they would have this little column that they called the guest album. And you can, if you're watching this on the screen rather than just listening to it, you can see it. People would write in and do little reviews of albums that people should be interested in or pay attention to. And somebody wrote in, now this is in April of 1969. So put that in perspective then. January is when Led Zeppelin I came out. February, March, April. 3 months later, there's a kid in high school that writes a review about Led Zeppelin I and basically says, you need to watch out for these guys because it's gonna be big. And I'm gonna read this to you because it's this kid, it's a high school kid that writes this column and he sends it to the Oakland Tribune and they print it. And again, if you're into Zeppelin, especially that period, and you know a little bit about it, you'll find this so interesting because this kid, what his assessment was. So the kid I don't know that it says how old he is, but he's a high school kid and he makes this prediction. So I want to read this to you. I think and it's not very long, but I think you'll really enjoy this. So here it is again, the guest album. This is Oakland Tribune, April 19th, 1969. And to further put this in perspective, Led Zeppelin II was not going to come out until October. So we're kind of halfway between 1 and 2 at this point, but 1's only been out for a few months. All right. Today's column is by Bill Egley of Wall Creek, a senior at Del Valle High. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but in his review of Led Zeppelin's new album, Bill predicts great things for the group, which will appear in person at Fillmore West on Thursday evening. Readers are invited to submit reviews of pop albums to the column each week. Okay, there you go. Those whose columns are selected for publication each receive a copy of a recently released stereo album. Address all correspondence to, and then it gives the address to send in your where you send your reviews and things. Okay, and here's the review. A new group from England, Led Zeppelin, has produced an outstanding first album, especially when one considers they had been together for only 3 weeks prior to making the disc. The group, put together by Jimmy Page, former guitarist with the Yardbirds, consists of lead singer Robert Plant, who is the male counterpart of Janis Joplin, John Paul Jones, organist and bass guitarist, John Bonham, excellent drummer, and Page, who plays various guitars and writes most of the music. And by the way, while we're on this topic, since they're talking about the fact that they were touring right at this moment, I'm actually curious if anybody watching these videos might have even been at that show that they would have played. This would have been in April of 1969 there in Oakland. So anyway, or if you just saw them on this tour. We love reading the concert stories from these early days. Let's see here. The first side starts off with a good hard rock song, Good Times, Bad Times, which could make it as a single release. Babe, I'm scrolling to the top. Babe, I'm gonna leave you follows, and although it has a good basic beat, to me it is about 2 minutes too long since it doesn't change patterns enough to hold interest. And curious to hear what you think about that or what you thought about that at the time. And it is kind of a slower plodding tune, but it's pretty awesome. You Shook Me, a Willie Dixon song, has a traditional blues beat and branches off into solos by Jones on organ, Plant on harmonica, and Page on guitar. Plant's singing adds greatly to the tune. Dazed and Confused ends side 1 and shows Page's use of the wah-wah and the effect of using a violin bow on the guitar. And of course, he became notorious for just that. using a violin bow on a guitar. A church-like organ solo by Jones in Your Time Is Gonna Come opens side 2 of the album. Scarcely a time lapse exists between songs on the disc, and Black Mountain Side begins while the first song is fading out. Page maintains a sitar effect and is backed by tabla drums in the Black Mountain cut. Communication breakdown, which, if I'm going to be honest, when I first discovered Led Zeppelin, that was the one that attracted me on this album. Just kind of that little more straight ahead hard rock and roll. And although I kind of branched out and started like Your Time Is Gonna Come, I started liking anyway. That's where it grew from for me. Could be the flip side of Good Times, a Good Times single. In this, Page shows his fantastic speed on guitar. I Can't Quit You Baby is another Willie Dixon blues tune, and Page's guitar work is similar to that of Alvin Lee of 10 Years After, which is a very interesting comparison. Does anybody remember 10 Years After? You know, they were at Woodstock, and they had the song that I remember them for the most is I'd Love to Change the World, and which is a brutally cool tune. Anyway, does anybody else understand that comparison that he's talking about there? How Many More Times? Oh, it's a great song. The song that has the feel of becoming the most popular finishes off the album and best shows the group's individual talents. It takes off from a basic beat into a jam of various musical items, including a bass line similar to that in I'm a Man, a segment of Beck's Bolero, which Page wrote for Jeff Beck, and a vocalization of The Hunter. All in all, Led Zeppelin. This is, by the way, this is a cool kid back in high school at this time. It's so interesting listening to this for me, because these are things for me that I discovered. I mean, Jeff Beck, like I said, I wasn't even born then, but later on in my life, I started playing the guitar and I started getting into Jeff Beck, and I bought Wired, and I bought, what were the others? Anyway, I started getting all this Jeff Beck stuff, and I started getting into him. And then, then you start working backwards and hearing all this old stuff anyway, it's so interesting listening to this stuff that these high school kids were listening to back then, and then knowing, that what that would have been like to actually be there when this stuff was coming out. Let's see. All in all, Led Zeppelin displays some of the best hard rock in addition to blues since Cream, Eric Clapton's group. Zeppelin should be marked as the next big group to hit in this country. And there you have it. You've got, what was his name again? Bill Egley of Wall Creek, this high school kid. And maybe everybody could have seen it. I don't know. I wasn't alive then. I know that first album did really, really well, but it's fascinating to kind of get in the head of a kid back then, and that would have been able to look at this and go, whoa, this is gonna be big. And then now for us, I like reading this stuff because we have 50 years, well over 55 years in between, and we're looking back at this and going, everything in between, and knowing what happened, how right this kid was, and probably a lot of other people too, but for him to be able to see that album comes out 3 months later, he's listening to it and he goes, okay, this is it. This is going to be the next big thing. And it was. There's so many people today that think Zeppelin was, the greatest band that ever existed. So anyway, I'd love to hear your feedback on this. If you relate to any of the stuff that was in this, There and Back. That's the Jeff Beck album I was remembering. That was the first Jeff Beck album I bought. I think was There and Back, because it was a black album cover. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So I'd love to get your feedback on this stuff. If you remembered this time, if you were alive during this time, or if you understood some of these connections that he was making, with 10 Years After, Alvin Lee, some of these cool little connections. Is pretty neat hearing this stuff now, all these years later. And of course, please follow the channel, like the video, and share this with your friends. And of course, as always, have yourself a fantastic day.